Hi everyone, this is MD Fahad Nahian. Hopefully everyone is doing well. So today this presentation for social work 913 assessment. My topic is the shortage of social and affordable housing in Australia, especially focusing on stakeholder, their power dynamics and the policy gap. So in my first assessment, I already discussed this issue as a structural social policy problem. In this presentation, I move one step further and look at how and who shapes the policy responses. So just a quick snapshot here. The issue is very serious. In 2024 to 2025, around 1.26 million low-income households are in housing stress, and 20.5% of renter households were low-income household in housing stress. So for new rental leaseholder, around 33% of median household income was needed to cover the rent. So it is too high for them. So here my main argument is that Australians housing crisis is both a supply issue and a power issue at the same time. There are not enough social and affordable homes, but the bigger question is who has the most influence over these policy decisions. So at first, to organize my presentation, I use three stages here. So the conceptualization, formation, and the implementation. So conceptualization is basically about how the issue is framed. Housing can be seen mainly as a supply problem or as a social justice issue linked to inequality and the housing rights. So the formation is about who shapes the policy response, such as government, researcher, service provider, market actors, and the advocacy group. So here social worker also can work as a advocacy group. So the implementation is about who actually delivers the response, such as state housing agencies, community housing providers, and the homelessness service. So the key point is that housing policy is not neutral. It is shaped by different roles, interest, and the level of power especially. So the key stakeholder group here, I have grouped the main stakeholder into five categories. The first is the government decision maker, such as federal and state government, treasurer, housing minister, and Housing Australia. The second one is evidence and advice actors, such as ORI, academics, and the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. The third group is service delivery actors, including community housing providers, homelessness services, and NGOs. The fourth is market actors such as developers, landlords, investor, and the property industry. The final group is affected community and the advocacy group, including the low-income renters, people experiencing homelessness, people with disability, and tenants or homelessness advocacy organization. All these groups are involved, but they do not have equal power. So the government decision makers are one of the most powerful stakeholder groups here. They mainly control the funding, they control the legislation, housing targets, and many of the rules around social and affordable housing. At the federal level, this include programs like Housing Australia Future Fund. At the state level, government are involved in public housing allocation system, homelessness service, and partnership with community housing providers. Here, the critical issue is that recognizing the crisis is not the same as solving it. So even when funding is announced, the response can still be limited by budgets, political priorities, and the market-based housing settings. So the government has strong formal power, but how the power is used depend on the policy priorities. So the evidence and the advice actors, which includes organizations like NHSEC, AWRI, academics, and the policy researcher, their role is to provide data, research, and a recommendation. They help define the scale of housing need and influence how the issue is understood. However, their power is different from the government power. Like they only can provide the evidence, but they do not have actually they actually don't have any direct control on funding or the legislation. So evidence can shape the policy debate, but the government still decide which evidence becomes policy. So this is important because strong evidence does not always lead to a strong structural reform. So service delivery actors include the community housing providers, homelessness service, and the NGOs. They work directly with people experiencing housing stress, homelessness, or insecure housing. They provide crisis accommodation, tenancy support, referrals, casework, and other forms of assistance. Especially in this sector, social workers work more closely to the clients. Their strength is fourth line knowledge. They understand the real impact of housing shortage on people's life, but their power is very limited because they usually do not control the housing supply. They do not control the funding levels or the eligibility rules. So the service provider often manages the effect of housing crisis, but they cannot solve the structural shortage by themselves. So the market actors include developers, landlord, property investor, and the broader property industry. They are important here because they influence the housing supply actually, private rental ability, and the investment in housing. In that sense, they are central of how housing is produced and assessed. However, market actors also have strong economic power. I guess they are the most powerful group here. They control the main thing. Their interests are often connected to profitability and the investment return. That's why the problem remains still and it's getting worse day by day. So the critical tension is that market actors can increase supply, but they can also reinforce housing as a commodity rather than a social right. They can shift policy towards investment confidence rather than secure housing for low income households. So here is the last group, the affected communities and the advocacy group. Affected community and the advocacy group include low income renters, people experiencing homelessness, people with disability, tenants, union, and homelessness advocacy group. Their role is important because they bring the lived experience and show the real impact of housing insecurity. This is not just about the numbers, it is about stress, instability, and the exclusion. In terms of power, they often have the lower formal power. They do not control the funding, they do not control the legislation, they do not control the housing supply, but they do have moral and the lived experience authority. The critical issue is that the effective community may be consulted, but consultation does not always mean real decision making power. So this slide compares the different types of power across the stakeholder group. Government has legal and funding power, evidence actor have knowledge power, service provider have fourth line practice power, market actors have economic power, affected community have lived experience and some sort of advocacy power. The main pattern is that the actors closest to housing insecurity often have least formal control over the policy decision. So this is very important here because it shows that housing policy is not only about the technical solution, it is also about who whose interest and voices are most influential. Here you can see these power differences shape the policy debate in several ways. So the first, housing can be framed mainly as a supply or market issue rather than as a social right. The second one is the policy priorities can become focused on budget and investment confidence rather than deeper structural reform. And the third one is service provider can be placed under pressure to manage crisis impacts without enough housing supply. Finally, affect communities may be consulted but still have limited influence over decisions. So unequal power can shift policy toward managing house shortage rather than structurally resolving it. To conclude, the shortage of social and affordable housing is not only a supply issue, it is also shaped by unequal power between stakeholders, like government and the market actors have the strongest influence, while the people most affected often have the least formal voice. So from a social worker position, I will say this shows the importance of policy advocacy. Social workers should not only support people individually, but they can also help to connect frontline and the lived experience to structural reform. Overall, housing policy needs stronger public investment, accountability, and meaningful participation from affected communities. So, housing is treated as a social right, not only a market issue. Here are the references. Thank you, everyone.